to kick us off.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin by saying it's such a privilege to be back here in the Pentagon, especially on this particular occasion. Once again, my name is Rabbi Irv Elson. I am currently the director of the JWB Jewish Chaplains Council. We are our nation's oldest agency that endorses, recruits, and trains rabbis for service in the military. But my real claim to fame is for the last 35 years. Before that, I was a chaplain in the United States Navy. And I was just mentioning to somebody every day, I've been retired for 6 years, and believe it or not, I miss it every day, every single day. I want to begin by just telling you a fascinating story about post-Civil War America. Does the name Albert Wilson mean anything to anybody? So back in 1956, a couple years before I was born, there was a little article in the back page of the New York Times, in the obituaries. And it had the obituary for this Mr. Albert Wilson. And it told a little bit about who he was. Albert Wilson was the last living member of an organization called the Grand Army of the Republic. After the Civil War, veterans really missed, as they do today, I guess, getting together with other veterans, and they formed this organization called the Grand Army of the Republic. And it was veterans from both the Confederacy and from the Union. And every year they had a big reunion in Washington, D.C. They used to call it an encampment. And for years and years and years after the end of the Civil War, veterans would come to Washington. They'd tell old stories. They would renew acquaintances. They would make new acquaintances with former enemies. They'd actually go to the War Department and lobby for better benefits. As a matter of fact, not in the script, but I'll tell you a quick byline that when veterans used to go to the War Department to get their service record, to take it to go get their benefits, it would be wrapped in a big silk red string. And that's where the expression comes from, red tape. Anyhow, so veterans would come to these encampments of the Grand Army of the Republic, and as you can imagine, as the years went by, less and less veterans were able to come, and little by little, the encampments became smaller and smaller and smaller. The last encampment of the Grand Army of the Republic was held in 1945, and 11 years later, the last surviving member of the Grand Army of the Republic, Mr. Albert Wilson, passed away. So it's been over 70 years since we witnessed the horrors of the Holocaust. And as a matter of fact, next week, we're going to have an anniversary it's a terrible anniversary, but it's the anniversary when the first American troops entered into a concentration camp. On April 29, 1945, members of the U.S. Armed Forces entered the Dachau concentration camp. And for years and years and years, and we're going to hear about this later, members of those units would say, we are the living witnesses of the Holocaust. So I have to share with you a nightmare that I have. And my nightmare is this, that in the not too distant future, we're going to see a little obituary in the back of the New York Times saying that the last eyewitness of the Holocaust has passed away. And my question is this: who then is going to be responsible for remembering the Holocaust? Who then is going to be the one to tell the stories and raise the alarms and show the pictures? I'd like to propose today that it is us, the members of the United States military, that it will be our responsibility. We were the first Americans to encounter the horrors of the Holocaust. And therefore, it is incumbent on us to remember and to observe. And that's why we're here today. Let not that obituary stop the memories of the Holocaust. It is our responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. I'm Chaplain Colonel Larry Baser, a National Guardsman. I am the Army National Guard Director of Religious Affairs and the Deputy Director for the Joint Chaplain's Office of the National Guard Bureau. And I'm a proud member of Nation's First Massachusetts National Guard. To be here to celebrate, well, I would say to commemorate, to remember, to even just be a part in this hallowed halls of our nation's Center for Defense, the Pentagon, to be able to do this is unbelievable, I have to say. Even for just the years that I spent as a pulpit rabbi for 25 years in a community celebrating and bringing people together, to be here today, to be able to remember, to discuss, to share, to reflect, in a sense, is what brings holiness to what we do and why the importance of our mission to be here. And to be able to then bring that light, which is what we remember of the darkness. So for me, it is truly great. It also, to be here, brings honor to the 6 million Jews who perished during the Holocaust, to the over 11 million total people who perished by evil, to honor, as you heard from Rabbi Elson, our American Armed Forces, who were liberators, who became that witness of what happened, is important. I want to share one thing that I think about a lot in dealing with the Holocaust, and that is something called active forgetfulness. So if we're here not to forget, to remember what happened, my fear is that we run into an active forgetfulness. Yeah, I learned about it in school, I heard about it, I saw the films, I even saw Schindler's List, you name it. But to then say, enough already. And that thought comes from an experience that I had back when it was my second summer as a reservist and actually at that time Army Reserve. I was at Heidelberg as a chaplain candidate for seminary years. And when I was staying over at this one inn, I got to know all the workers there, and many of them were from different countries who were the front desk. And the weekend coming up, I was heading off to see Dachau, the same camp that Rabbi Elson spoke about that was the first for our armed forces to liberate. And I was anticipating what it would mean to go there. It was my first experience really coming to full grips with the Holocaust and a place, not just a name. And I mentioned it to the German worker at that time. And I said, I'm going off to Dachau on Sunday to visit. And her response was, enough already. We remember, we learned about it. Hey, it says, can't we just, forgive and forget? And I was silent. Oh, but it's important to remember, I think afterwards I stumble with words. We know we were wrong, that's it. And as I reflected as time went on, that became my fear, active forgetfulness. And so our task is to remember, to learn, to hear, and to share. Because I also agree with Rabbi Elson. When that time of an obituary comes up at the last witness to the horrors of the Holocaust, that a new generation will come and say, no, I may not have been there, but I will remember and I will actively seek for good that we should never forget. And I'll close before we get into our important discussion by mentioning and bringing the person who's one of the great inspirations for me, and that is Rena Finder. You may not have heard about Rena Finder. She was from Krakow, Poland. Grew up, she was an only child, and she's still living well in Framingham, Massachusetts. She's one of my congregants, my former congregants. And Rena, as I said, grew up, had a room that overlooked a field where soccer would take place and remembered the church bells in a distance. And then she would talk about how she had to leave her apartment. She was probably about 12 years old. And people who she said that she was friendly with didn't come even goodbye to say goodbye. And as she and her parents left their apartment, looked up back at the window, and people would sneak a look, but then close it, seemingly to want to now forget these people that we're friends with. And Rena Finder was sent later on to the ghetto in Krakow, and from there to Plaszow work camp. And there, Rena met Oskar Schindler and his wife. And they were on the list of Schindler's List. And she would recount both the horrors she experienced, including going to Auschwitz, but what Oskar Schindler did of the righteous Gentile, the person who sought out to risk their lives to save people. And she still tells the story of Oskar Schindler. And to fast forward what it means, I'm proud to say that both my children went on a pilgrimage to both Poland and Israel, part of the youth group from my synagogue movement. And one of the things they did in Krakow is they went to the door that was Rena's apartment, and they read the letter that she wrote to the students to tell them about her experience. And I had a chance to do that with my own synagogue trip. And I want to encourage everyone, when you have the opportunity through different missions or TDYs or whatever, when you're in Germany or in Poland, stop and see. Be a new eyewitness and share what you saw for a new generation. The conversation must continue. We must actively remember to bring hope for people. And now, before we begin our conversation, we want to pause to actually do a way of actively remembering by lighting candles. In so many faith groups and traditions, people will light candles to remember those who have died. And so too, during Holocaust Remembrance Day, the opportunity to light candles. We have traditionally 6 candles, each candle for one of the 1 million Jews, 6 million Jews who perished. Here we will be lighting special electric candles here at the Pentagon with one more, so 7 candles. And the 7th candle represents all those who perished in the Holocaust, but more so for atrocities. And we don't have to go far to see where atrocities are happening now in Europe yet again. And so let this light help us remember. Let these lights help burn away the darkness. There are those who have been asked to come forward to help us light. I ask you to come forward at this time. And before we begin, and if you have it on, if you've downloaded it, those who have it, we'll have this reading to remember what it is to light. Let us read together. We light this yellow candle to rekindle God's flame, to shine his light upon the world once again, to sanctify the memories of the millions of souls, to honor their prayers and all their lost goals. We bless their existence by being alive, to light this yellow candle as proof we survived. Poem and Blessing by Ron Adler. Ma'am, would you light the first one? Go down. Thank you, ma'am. Sir. Sir. And together we gather around to light the final candle. May these candles help us to remember. May we actively seek peace and pursue peace for all of the divine's children. Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for your words of wisdom. Thank you, both chaplains, of your personal stories. And let's start the conversation. So we just completed lighting the candles, and you explained so eloquently why it was important to light the candles. Do you have any personal stories or accounts of the candle lighting ceremony from either your past or what you're currently doing in your congregations? I'll start with you, Chaplain Nelson.
So we light a candle at the beginning of each holy day to remember those in our family who have passed. And we also light a yellow candle for our family members that perished in the Holocaust. So I just have memories of my grandmother, then my mother, and now us before each holiday. And we're now in the middle of Passover, and remembering as we begin Passover, just lighting those two candles over. And the yellow's it's a very stark color for us. It reminds us of the star that Jews were forced to wear. Yeah, every holiday is a reminder.
Thank you.
It's a great question. For me, it was lighting candles when we were at the Plaskow concentration camp when I led a synagogue trip. And there was nothing left of where the ground was except for this very austere monument of sort of a mother sort of crying over children. And it was hard to light the candle because the wind was blowing. But I remember the group all sort of gathering around to sort of shield the flames that it would burn. And that we would take that time to remember. And that's one thing that really has stood out for me in what it means to commemorate the Holocaust and to remember.
Thank you. Both of you talked about the military presence in liberating the camps. And after the liberation of the camps, then General Eisenhower sent Congress representatives, journalists, military officers to the concentration camps because he wanted eyewitness accounts to see the monstrosity of the camps. Can you tell me, why is it important now for leaders to either talk about it, as you mentioned earlier, or at least continue to witness or talk about those eyewitness accounts so we don't continue to have exclusionary behavior? What does it mean for the military today?
Well, how insightful of General Eisenhower to do that. And I guess he knew that the way human beings are, that in the not too distant future, since the end of the war, there would be people who said it's too incredible for it to be true. And how insightful of him to realize that he needed people of credibility who were eyewitnesses. I remember reading many years ago General George Patton's autobiography, and he describes in detail going to the camp. And here is, battle-hardened. I guess he was hardened before the battle, but just a rough and tough Army general, battle-hardened, who said he had a hard time walking through the camps. So again, just great insight. And here we are, 70 years later, and already in the United States, it's not uncommon to find Holocaust deniers. And we need to have that record of people who were trusted by the American people at the time to say, I was there. I saw it with my own eyes.
There's an interesting story that also comes from General Eisenhower and General Patton. General Eisenhower first stated that he didn't want to go. Like he said, okay, I heard reports. And one of his assistants, really, who was Jewish, pushed him to go. And he said afterward that, completely sickened, that he actually forced Patton to go, wow, which is interesting. And both of them lost their cookies afterwards. They threw up from what they're seeing. But immediately afterwards is when he sent the message out that if we don't send the message out, that we saw it for ourselves, it's easy for for people to say, it never really happened, or it couldn't have been as bad. So I think that's important. I'll do a fast forward on sort of a local level. And my synagogue was in Framingham, Massachusetts, and there was someone in the town that was a Holocaust denier. And even had a TV show on the local, wow, channel to promote this. And really, my congregants would be upset. And shortly after he was really pushing this was when I led the synagogue trip to Poland and Eastern Europe. And here I was we were in Auschwitz, and it was after finally seeing the crematoria, the gas chambers, all the horrors. I was talking to our guide who was Polish. He was a graduate student who was our tour guide. And I said, because we were chatting a little bit, I said, we have this person back in my hometown who denies the Holocaust, who's adamantly going out. And he stopped, he was in shock. He goes, what? What? And these are the words that have sort of lived with me since there. You bring him here, you bring him to me, I will show him that this was real. I will show you the death and destruction. He needs to see it. And I will say that was one of the things that gave me faith again, of people who would stand up and say, together, religion didn't matter. It was what human beings do. And so we have to have that going forward to what we're seeing in this world.
Wow.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not only to remember, but to pass on the lessons. Mm-hmm. So it's remembering is just step one. So when you have people who either refuse to acknowledge the Holocaust or refuse to acknowledge the magnitude of the Holocaust, it's important to say, one of the lessons is that there are going to be people like that, and how do we fight that?
I do think it's crucial for our senior leaders, both our civilian senior leaders and our military leaders, to be able to, in a sense, be frontline to tell why this is important, to see it, and then to share. I'll use a quote from the Band of Brothers movie when they visit the Holocaust. It's why we fight. It's why we fight for what's right and what's good. And so our senior leaders, I believe, they have to be one of our best voice boxes to say, we have to do better, we have to do that. And I believe they do. That's the message that I get.
Which in itself is scary, to think that we have to keep on remembering the Holocaust and teaching the lessons of the Holocaust, because mm-hmm. there's a possibility that it might happen again, that it's happening, or it happened before, since the war. So it's very troublesome to say. Even now we have eyewitnesses, and they're deniers, and there are parts of the world where genocide has happened and is happening. So.
Absolutely. Germans, something that you both have talked about, Germans require in their curriculum in schools to learn about it. And what would you give us practical prescription on how here in the United States, how could we learn, like you said, remembering is very important. sharing is very important. We talked a little bit about amongst leadership in the military, but even practically amongst our curriculum in secondary schools. How would you recommend that we continue this conversation and weave it into our curriculum in the United States schools?
So, great question. A couple of thoughts. So my first time visiting Israel was in 1982. And one of the things that I was most shocked about was that all the public buses and all the tourist buses were made by Mercedes. They were all German buses. And I thought it was very, very interesting. And digging a little deeper and talking to people in Israel, I learned that Germany was and is one of Israel's closest friends. So talking about lessons learned. But directly to your question, yes, I think the new Germany, the post-war Germany, asked the very same question: how do we remember, and how do we make sure that it doesn't happen again, at least in our country? And they looked at all the educational models, and they said we need to confront it straight on. And we need to teach the lessons. And in a way, reading the papers today, how refreshing it is that there's no dispute in the country, in Germany, to say we need to confront it head on. And so you were asking, what lessons can we learn? We live in difficult times here in the United States. And I think you and I talked about the process has to be that we need to confront the ugliness of our country head on, and there from then on learn the lessons, be it slavery, be it racism, be it whatever you want, you confront that head on, and say this is the history, these are the facts, and then your interpretation of the history, and there's a lot of discussion now, well, what does it mean, and so on, that we could leave up to the individual schools and parents and synagogues and churches and so on. But I think the big lesson we learned from Germany is that the history is the history. You have your right to your opinion, but you don't have your right. You don't have the right to your own facts. So let's teach the facts, and then together as a nation, we'll interpret the lesson. We'll interpret what it meant, and we'll learn the lessons. But I, for years, was very hesitant to visit Germany, and I visited Germany, and it was amazing to me how in one generation the country has transformed itself based on its past.
Wow.
I'll just briefly say that it's, I had a chance as a pulpit rabbi in Boston area to go with the German consulate Consul General to Germany on a program with 12 rabbis called Remembrance and Reconciliation. And we had a chance to ask all the questions we wanted and to see things. And it was right when Germany was struggling, well, I will say struggling, when the great influx of refugees coming in from Eastern Europe. And so I walked away saying, in some way, I think Germany is doing a better job at dealing with the Holocaust in their past than I dare say our own United States. Because Rabbi Elson was spot on. They dealt with it, they could not hide from it. They couldn't sort of gloss over something, sort of get some Kleenex to sort of wipe away. They had to face it. Which was very different than my opening comments about this young woman who said, enough already. It's there, because there'll always be there. But from a public stance, and I think maybe that's the key, here are the facts. This is our history. This is our past. We will not let this happen again. And we will work all the more so to say we're going to be the beacon. And so the public statement was, we are going to bring in refugees because we understand what it means. So I would say we can learn from each other. And one part, though, I think where our armed forces is the DoD is actually ahead of parts of the country. The fact that we have a set curriculum, which is the DoD Days of Remembrance, which is part of what we teach with all the various parts. And what we're seeing in the United States, that isn't always so. So that is one thing that we really must be the role model for the rest of the country to say we are willing, we need and want to embrace, learn about these, embrace it, struggle with it, so we will be better.
I really like what you said about that episode of Band of Brothers, the one episode where they go into the camp, and the name of that episode is Why We Fight. So I think Americans who are not in uniform, they have the luxury of asking and questioning and so on why we fight. I think those of you in uniform, or those of us who are worn, we don't have that luxury. We have skin in the game. What do they say? It's the difference between a pig and a chicken. The chicken can afford to be magnanimous because it's only giving eggs, but the pig, it's total commitment on the pig's part. It is a great sense of pride when the DoD unveiled this curriculum for Days of Remembrance of the Holocaust, and taking it seriously. So, I'll stop here because I can go on for a couple hours. I'll stop here.
Oh, it's really good insight. So recently, I'm going to change the subject just a little bit, but still talk about schools. Recently, a Tennessee school banned a book called Mouse. It's a graphic novel telling the story of a Nazi camp survivors because of its realistic depiction of the concentration camps. What is the impact of banning books like Mouse? I'll start with you.
So if you ban Mouse, what's next? What's next? And so Mouse became the way, through Art Spiegel, who told his own story of being a Holocaust survivor and going through the camps. It was the way he taught. He was able to share his experience. And for many of our young people, in a sense, the graphic novels sort of replaced a lot of how we learn, they read. So to stop that is at least one avenue is frightening. I've always been fascinated by memorials and monuments. It's very interesting in in Munich, I'm trying to think, Berlin. I'm trying to remember the right place, where one of the first book burnings by the Nazi Party early in like 1933 took place. And there's a monument, and it's one of the most interesting monuments I've ever seen. And I still remember this. So most monuments are built up, and you would think, okay, you would have piles of books as the monument. What this is it's a glass floor in the ground. And it's just a whole big, sort of plaza area. And when you look down, it was the spot where the burning took place. And when you look down, the only thing in there are empty bookshelves. Books, you ask why, what does it mean? It's, I think, one of the greatest things that we have, that we take what we learn, we experience, we feel, we struggle with, and we then share that it lives beyond us, or is supposed to live beyond us. And then to say, oh no, it's not good enough.
Or it's too good.
Or it's too good.
Yeah, too graphic.
And if it's too graphic, then what we really have to say is, okay, you may not want to look at it now, but let's have a conversation. But if you get rid of the book, then maybe the conversation never happens.
As a huge comic book guy, I chuckled a little bit and I cried. And I chuckled a little bit first saying, look, sadly, our children are exposed to so much worse in violence. And you look at your average video game, or you look at your average TV show. So let's not be disingenuous that this is their first encounter with violence. And I also cried a little bit because, like Rabbi Baser said, there's a saying, and I don't think it's a Jewish saying. It says when they burn books, they'll end up burning people. Again, it's important to learn the facts, and how it's presented, I understand. But like you said, what's next? Look, the Bible has horrible violence in it, and yet it's a book that has led mankind for thousands of years. So banning books is not the answer.
Thank you. So, one of my last questions. So you brought up the Bible, and there are 3 religious holidays or observances this week. It's Easter, it's Ramadan, it's Passover. And they usually fall around the same time frame, but it happens to fall within the week. What are your thoughts about those 3 coming together in 2022?
I want to share with you one of my favorite stories, and it's a story of a friend of ours and a colleague, former Navy chaplain, Rabbi Arnie Resnikoff. Rabbi Resnikoff was a rabbi with the Marine Expeditionary Unit that was in Beirut, when they sent the Marines ashore in Beirut. And prior to the explosion of the Marine barracks in Beirut, they came under rocket fire, and himself and the Catholic chaplain, the Protestant chaplain, all jumped into a foxhole together. And Rabbi Resnikoff commented, saying this is probably the first interfaith foxhole in all of the Middle East, which was funny. But I think the next comment was the important one. He said, if we had more interfaith foxholes, probably there wouldn't be a need for foxholes altogether. And it was wonderful to celebrate Passover last week, and I'll tell you why in a couple of minutes, especially for me. But how wonderful to celebrate Passover with my family, my friends, my fellow congregants, and see my other friends celebrating Easter and Holy Week, and our Muslim brothers and sisters in the middle of their time of Ramadan. So I think if we had more holidays together, there'd be less of a need to have strife during those holidays.
Thank you.
Beat that.
Well, I will say what's interesting to talk about of a Holy Week, where from Easter Sunday, and then the Holy Week leading up for Christians to there, but really on the Western side of Christianity, it was actually someone told me this is Holy Week leading up to Easter for our Orthodox Christian brothers and sisters. Ramadan, midst of Passover. And I just read somewhere that also both in Hindu faith group and in, I think even in Buddhism, there are special days within this period. So you could say, okay, by chance, coincidence, something else, something divine, however one sees that, is what's special. I'll actually say one of the things that I love about being a Jewish chaplain, and actually just being a chaplain, is the ability for me to truly learn about other faith groups. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I'll teach why it's good to be a chaplain, I learned to pray extemporaneously from my Protestant brothers and sisters back in chaplain school. Because from our tradition, we're very formulaic. You know, it's set prayer, here it is, time, place, setting. But many times they would say, Rabbi, would you lead us in prayer? And I stumbled a lot of the first time, but listening to my friends, learning about how they do it, allowed me to then say, when someone says, Rabbi, would you offer a prayer? To bring the divine at that moment, you know, what's coming from my heart, different than just stringing together phrases, is one of the things about, in a sense, like how these holidays come together. So I always believe when we stop and we learn and we ask, when we ask difficult questions about a faith, from love, that we become stronger. And one great example, and I know and I learned first the challenges that Latter-day Saint believers, a lot of times we're not always, there's a lot of mystery what goes on. And I had a chance to actually have lunch with some of the leaders of their church from the Latter-day Saints. And they said, ask us anything. And I did. And it was wonderful. And it's because of the time and place. So to have these holidays all together truly is what sacred ground is. And when we walk upon sacred ground, good things can come.
Thank you. You both reiterated why it was important to remember. It's 77 years after World War II, and we are having days of remembrance. To wrap up this event for this year, what would you like the viewers and our audience to take away? What were some of the topics you'd like us to remember?
So I had a very special first 2 days of Passover this last week. On Friday night, we were literally in the middle of our Passover Seder observance, and we got word that my daughter-in-law had given birth to our first grandchild. So this was a very special Passover. And I've been thinking about the baby a lot, especially in relation to today and hope and fortitude. So I talked earlier about one of my great nightmares, and that is who will remember. I have another, nightmare's kind of strong, I have another concern, and that is that 10 years from now, 8 years from now, I'm going to be bouncing my grandson on my lap, and he's going to have studied in school about the war in Ukraine right now or other conflicts. And my concern is he's going to look me in the eye and say, Granddad, what did you do to stop it? And I need to have an answer for him. So as we look at and remember the lessons of the Holocaust and lessons of hope. The hope is that we have the strength and the means to stop current genocides and the fortitude to do the right thing to stop oppression.
Thank you.
Great question. I think what I look for, what I want to always see is that we're willing to have, again, I'll use the phrasing, difficult conversations with love, to talk about the things that are hard and why they can cause someone pain. And part of the conversation is not just telling the story, but actually listening. Not just hearing words, but truly listening, internalizing. And so I believe we need to do a lot more of that. Today is one part. What we do here in this setting, and I'm going to say all the more so because we're in this setting here at the Pentagon, and using an Air Force model of always aiming high, and in a sense to look to be on eagle's wings, that we can see that we're able to have the conversations to go forward. One part with the travesty would be is we have this, say it was really nice, and we go our separate ways, and nothing else comes from it. So maybe one thing, and I believe it's little things. If one person here who's either online or here goes back to their workspace and said, I just attended this event, or I watched it online, and wow, it was really something special, and wow, it was at the Pentagon. For me, that is really something. And so to have a change is you have to do something. So you have to be active. You have to actively remember. You have to remind people. And maybe if you take the one extra step and say, I do this every year. could be the response. Say, no. Every year isn't enough. It's the fact that we did it now and we must do it for the future is how you combat it. And that little bit makes a difference. And so we each have a part to play. And we must do it. It's not a luxury. And so to be here is one part of making things happen.
For our listeners and our audience, if they wanted to take next steps, where can you recommend they connect to learn more about the Holocaust, about other topics? What would be your recommendation?
I would say one of the great, because everyone will always say, go online and stuff. The United States Holocaust Museum and Memorial in Washington, D.C., I think has an outstanding website. And so to go there's testimonies. Rena Finder is recorded there. You could look her up. Also tied with that, and I know they're connected, is the Steven Spielberg Shoah Foundation. And I think she's also there to hear her story. So that's a great place to start. Another part is, depending if you out there in our nation, to go to, if you find out a major city has a Holocaust either a museum or a lot of them will have memorials, a lot of them in the bigger city, just before you push off to the next site, go visit it and reflect and share that experience. And then read, and there's some incredible films out there, both documentary and even from the Hollywood version. But it's out there. You have to be willing to engage.
And so I have one film that I want to recommend, but I want to build on what Chaplain Baser said, that look at it in the context, especially for our airmen, look at it in the context of here, today, and me. You get up in the morning, you're building that pallet to go into a cargo plane. We don't know where it's going to go, but it's here, today, and me. What am I doing to make this a better world, to leave the world of the Holocaust behind, and so on. I just want to recommend one great movie, Netflix, whatever it is you watch. It's called Paperclips. I'm not going to say more about it, but if you watch no other movie this week, that's the movie to watch, Paperclips.
Thank you. Those are great resources. So finally, I can't have two chaplains on stage without asking that you offer a prayer. So
I'm going to defer to my better looks.
okay.
So thank you so much. And again, from both of us, what an honor for us to be here and to be with all of you out there. So please join me in prayer or personal thought if you so freely choose to. Our ever-loving God, our divine, we ask you to raise us up on eagle's wings, to be able to see what is out there in the world that you created, to see the beauty of people coming together, but to also always give us the gift of memory, and the gift of memory that sometimes your children seek to hurt others. And so that with this memory, what has happened in the Shoah, where 6 million of your precious Jewish children perished, where over 11 million of all your children perished because of evil by man or woman, that we are able to look down and to then act, that we can do good in your world, that we all, whether in uniform or civilian, supporters, citizens of our nation, children of your creation, will bring hope and light, that we just remember that we will not repeat the horrors that engulfed us over 70 years ago. But together, as one nation, we will make a better world. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Chaplain Baser. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us today. And we ask you to continue to think about the things that were shared today and find ways to bring hope and honor your fellow servicemen, members, and civilians by learning about them and building bridges across differences in order to strengthen our forces. It's through this that we improve operational outcomes and allow those around us to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. This was really
thank
special
you.
for me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.